Welcome to the IT Channel Inbound Marketing Podcast, episode number 10, Channel Marketing Strategy, Communities, Dandelions, and $300 million in revenue. I am your host, Joshua Feinberg, and I'm joined today by Jay McBain, co-founder and chief social officer at ChannelEyes in Albany, New York. The IT Channel Inbound Marketing Podcast helps IT channel companies, especially those in IT consulting, computer repair, managed services, and cloud, use inbound marketing and content marketing to attract highly qualified visitors, convert visitors into engaged leads, close sales faster with the right kinds of clients, and delight clients for long-term retention. In this episode, we're going to look at channel marketing strategy, communities, dandelions, and $300 million in additional revenue. I am here with Jay McBain of ChannelEyes. Jay is the co-founder and chief social officer. ChannelEyes is a social and mobile platform that helps IT channel program managers stay in touch with their channel partners on a very regular basis to increase the levels of engagement. And I'm going to be talking with Jay today about some of his favorite social and mobile tips that are particularly applicable to IT channel program managers and IT channel partners. Thanks so much, Jay, for coming on the IT Channel Inbound Marketing Podcast.
Well, thank you, Josh. My pleasure.
So you have a very interesting resume. I guess you'd call it more of a LinkedIn profile nowadays. And looking back now at I know you spent a lot of time at IBM and then when it spun off to Lenovo. When you think back to the early years of your IT channel career with IBM Canada in the mid-90s, what did you find at the time were the most effective marketing and sales tools that you were able to utilize?
Well, it's an interesting question. If I look back, especially 1994 and 1995, IBM at the time was, really focused on, selling large equipment, mainframes, and just getting into the services business. At the time, the web was just starting. I was in the PC division. So what we were trying to do is sell into new types of partners. It was really the first time that IBM was feeling the effects of Compaq computer in the PC business, and Compaq had a strategy where it would sign up basically any type of partner. At the time, IBM really ran a franchising type of business partner program where we'd pick up 3 or 4 partners per city, and everyone would have their zone and be protected. Where Compaq at the time just signed up everyone and really started this idea of the long tail within the channel partner world, and signed up tens of thousands of partners, where we would have maybe a couple of hundred top partners. So my job back then was really to sign up kind of the long tail, learn about the different types of partners, maybe even partners that weren't focused on hardware, but did services as a business or sold software as a business. And really the strategy was to go wide as opposed to go deep.
That's interesting that years before Amazon and iTunes were kind of planting the seeds and becoming well-known, although I guess Amazon kind of got its start around that era, and before the long tail was really well-known in our pop culture or business, at least among business book readers, that you saw that big difference in how Compaq was recruiting partners versus how IBM was recruiting partners. Now, if you think ahead to the few years that came right before launching ChannelEyes, was there kind of a big seminal or aha kind of moment where you noticed something major changing in the channel with how marketing and sales enablement was being done and the tools that were being used?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I follow on the discussion, back in the day, again in the 90s, without the internet, we had basic email. We had obviously traditional advertising, some traditional marketing that we would do, sending out direct mail and other things. But if I would count the marketing vehicles, there probably was 5 or 6 that we would use. As I approached, let's say 2010, the amount of vehicles had exploded to close to 30. So this meant on the internet that you had your different social places that you would communicate through. Obviously, we're on a podcast right now. There was video casting, podcast. There was webinars, and then combined with the traditional trade shows and some of the more traditional marketing. But I kind of coined it dandelion marketing, where this idea of not only do you have 30 different vehicles and people that participate or focus in different areas, but also you had a real community approach to managing a larger channel. So what I found is that partners would hang out in 1, maybe 2 communities, and that could be either by what their specialty was, what type of partner they were. For example, a managed service provider could be their major vendor or distributor that they sell. Could be a thought leader or a peer group. So at the same time as having 30 vehicles, we found out that there's pretty close to 30 vehicles, sort of 30 communities in North America. And, many of these communities, communicate in, dozens of different ways as well. So the complication, and to oversimplify, is, let's say we have 30 communities and we have 30 vehicles. You multiply the 2 things together. In 2010, we were doing 900 things a week to communicate.
That's a lot of fragmentation.
It is. The word dandelion kind of means, and if you think of a dandelion in your yard, it sends out seeds, and send out 1,000 seeds, not knowing which are going to plant and take root, but that a month later you have a yard full of dandelions. So the dandelion over the years never really evolved. You'd think that it would get better, and we always learned in our business training and even in our college training, to focus on a few things and really to pick the 3 or 4 things that are going to have a big impact, and really swing for the fences. Make it perfect. Get hit that home run. In dandelion marketing, the idea is to swing for singles, and the idea is that you don't know which of your vehicles or communities are going to plant. So whether you're sending out a tweet with 140 characters, or you're going to a major trade show that you're spending tens of thousands of dollars on and really focusing on, you don't know which are going to have the impact on the partner. So therefore, it's really a game of quantity as opposed to quality, which is completely reverse from everything that you were ever taught.
So the interesting thing is you're kind of looking that there's 900 cells in the spreadsheet, I guess, where you're tracking the channels and then tracking the communities that where they intersect. And on the one hand, you're trying to forecast which are actually going to work, and on the other hand, you're saying pick the items that are most likely. So the question is, you have a forecasting problem, and then past tense, you kind of have a tracking and measurement problem. Do you see any particularly good examples in the channel of companies that seem to have mastered both?
There are, some great companies out there, and I spent some time, and we also spent some money studying this phenomenon. And what I was trying to figure out is, you've got all these vehicles, and everyone is different. And if I ask you, Josh, how you prefer to receive information, we were speaking earlier, and you got a piece of critical information that I was sending out via Google Plus. And I don't hear that very often, and I wanted to study how many people, use Twitter as their primary engine? How many people are webinar people, that love to dial in and, get what they need over their lunch hour? And how many people like to go to trade shows and work face-to-face or sit in an education session or use email as their primary? So if I listed all 30, what if you stack rank them all and really find out what the real story was? And the research came back. It was kind of interesting that 12% of people are webinar people. They love them. They live for them. That's how they get their information. It just works really, really well for them. It means 88% of people aren't webinar people. They will go if forced. If there's no other mechanisms. But if you have a really good webinar program, a previous company that I worked with, Autotask, was probably one of the best at running webinars and have hundreds and hundreds of people that came every week. But again, that satisfies a small number. Other numbers, email is still at 30% of people, kind of prefer, even though it's overloaded, they kind of prefer it in one place in their inbox. I mentioned Twitter, it's at 2%. So you'd think, I've got 30 things to do. Why would I tweet, given that, 98% of people will not see my tweets? Well, the answer is that, it's very simple to do. And the 2% is the fastest growing out of any of the other vehicles. So it'll be 3, and then it'll be 4, and then it'll be 5%. So having a Twitter account, being able to market through there, and other people aren't doing it that well. So you might pick up the 2%, but as it grows, you can grow with that as well. So if you do the 30 things, you cover the 100% of audiences. If you touch the 30 communities, let's say you touch 90% or so of all channel partners. So that's kind of the benefit. And when I look at companies doing a good job, what they do is try to bring some focus into the chaos. You use the word spray. I mean, you can definitely just start jamming out things and have no overarching strategy. But the companies that do it well run a series of themes. And to explain how they do it is, let's break the year up into 12 months, and every month let's have a theme. So we're coming into October 2013. We're going to focus October on security. And the way you do it is you look across the 900, but now you go back to a theme. So you start the month off. You probably write a piece. It'll exist probably as a blog, and you don't have to be a perfect writer to do that, but get your ideas down, get someone to edit it, and have kind of a top level security as it links into your products and services, as it applies to the channel. You can publish that on your blog. That blog then within minutes can convert itself into a press release, and you can go out to a dozen or so or 24 magazines that are in our industry and have an official press release that month and do some media, show up in some media magazines as well as blogs. That then converts throughout the month into tweets, Facebook posts, LinkedIn posts can all be used successfully. Out of that blog, you can also run a weekly webinar. So 4 webinars can come from the ideas inside that blog, podcasts and vodcasts. Your trade shows that month, you can basically pull up a banner, have your normal trade show booth, but have a brochure maybe and a pull-up banner that you can build for $200 to focus on security. And then down the road, you're hitting on the different vehicles, writing newsletters, everything else out of the same content, out of the same theme, so that you're having an impact. And then you walk through all of these different vehicles and repurpose across all the different communities. And that's the way that 90+% of channel partners out there, not only see your company, you remain visible, but also get kind of a coordinated message.
So there's a lot of picking a centralized theme and finding multiple ways to repurpose that theme across a lot of different channels to really increase the reach.
Yeah, one of the things that hasn't changed, since 1994 or probably 1894, is the theory that in marketing people get it after 7 times. So the old adage that you have to tell someone 7 times before they participate or pay attention or even know who you are, it's still true. And even though there's 1,000 ways you can get communication today, and it just seems like it's chaotic, the 7 times rule exists. The only nuance to it now is it's 7 times 7 different ways. So it doesn't matter if someone picked it up in a tweet or picked it up in a newsletter or picked it up at a trade show. And in many cases, they won't remember. Research says that they don't remember. But after the 7th time, you've heard of a disaster recovery company, and you've just seen their logo, you've seen their content, you've walked by their booth. But after the 7th time, something in your brain says that I've seen this too many times to be a coincidence. Next time I see it, I'm going to ask a question, or I'm going to spend a bit of time, or I'm going to click on the link. Something's there that I need to know what this is. And the interesting thing of Dandelion marketing and showing up across communities and across all these vehicles is you can successfully get to 7 very quickly. And I had to use this kind of approach when we became Lenovo. And in 2005, no one in the Western world or English-speaking world in North America had ever heard of Lenovo. It was a brand new company. It was a brand new brand. People on the outset thought that we were a pharmaceutical company, because it kind of sounds like drugs. Lenovo, that we make some sort of drugs that you would see on TV or something. But so we had to start from zero and build up a brand. And if we just chose 3 things, like an email campaign, we'd run a couple of big trade shows, we would have impacted very few people. So we had to get to 7 very quickly. We did this approach of doing 900 things a week, and it wasn't 900 because all communities didn't use 30 vehicles each. So if I look at some of the communities out there that we attach, and some of the communities that your listeners will recognize, like ASCII Group, SMB Nation, there's the UBM group, so CRN and Exchange and that group. There's distributor communities. Think of Varnex and Tech Select and the different Ingram communities. There's in the vendor world, you think of ConnectWise runs a very powerful community. HTG, which is kind of part of that, but its own peer group. Competitive to Autotask, which runs a community. Competitive to Tiger Paw, which runs a community. You look across all of these different communities, and each of them don't run all vehicles, but most of them have the social accounts. They send out an email, newsletters. Many of them have a magazine. All of them run some sort of trade show or recurring road shows. So they'll normally have between, let's say, 12 and 20 different vehicles that you can participate. And once you write that blog once, you can repurpose it right across every one of those communities.
So when you look at all these different permutations and combinations you can possibly be working with, one of the big buzzwords we hear the last couple of years are marketing analytics and big data. None of this would have existed 20 years ago, or certainly been affordable to really crunch numbers from that stage. But when you were kind of putting together the business plan for ChannelEyes and ultimately Channel Candy, how much of that kind of thinking permeated what to do with the whole platform?
Actually, a lot of what we did on the marketing, again, served with the challenge of building a brand that no one had ever heard of, knowing that nothing changed, whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a startup that no one's heard of your brand. You need to get to 7, and you have to spread it across. Used very similar type of strategy coming out of the gate. One other interesting thing, and one that's really important in whatever industry you're in and whatever target audience you want to hit, I'll call it endorsements. So if you've read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, he spends the first quarter of the book talking about influencers and connectors. And, it's kind of a fascinating concept, and, he talked about Paul Revere and a bunch of things, but I looked to apply that to our industry, and it became apparent as I started traveling in the trade shows. I only moved to the U.S. from Canada in 2009. So, building an audience and building credibility in the U.S., I gave myself kind of 6 months to do it. And I recognized quickly, as I was on the road, is that there was really, people that stuck out. I knew if I could approach someone that they could get me, to the next 10 people. And this was, awareness, visibility. But connectors know, and that's their skill, is they have the ability of kind of knowing how to get from A to B, who you need to meet, making that introduction. And I started writing down lists, and I'd ask lots of questions, and I started to hear the same names over and over. When I met those people, I quickly found out. So the net of the story is there's about 100 people in our industry that are super connectors. They, pretty well know everything, know everyone. They're the ones that connect the dots. And interestingly enough, is none of them, they're all very different people, different personalities. It's not like they're extroverted, people that, can be the life of the party. They're all very, very different people. They all have different roles. They work for different types of companies. Some are in the media, some are distributors, some are vendors, some are thought leaders, some are peer group leaders, some are in associations. It doesn't matter, but the fact is there's really 100 people that you need to know. This goes for if you go to any city, there's usually 100 people that are kind of behind everything. If you look at the U.S. government, there's kind of 100 people. That any size of organization or any size of something really goes back to I think about 100 people that that make it all work. So knowing that there's these connectors, what a brand can do is try to get an endorsement. And an endorsement can be as simple as just being involved or allowed into the community. Could be an implied endorsement, or it can be at something on stage where someone gets up and says, "Hey, these guys are great. I endorse. I think everyone should use them." So I deployed this in 2009. I had a peer group leader that got up on stage in front of 600 people and said, "Hey, listen, I love HP. I sit on HP's customer advisory board. That's who I've chosen. But hey, these ThinkPad guys aren't bad. They make really good products. And make sure before you leave this, conference that you talk to Jay." It pointed to me in the front row. So, I talked to 600 people. Signed up 400 of them, and 1 year later, the measurement was it was $10 million of additional revenue. And that was an endorsement that wasn't really even an endorsement. It's like, hey, I love your competitor. I will, be buried in a coffin with one of your competitor's laptops. I will never leave your competitor. But hey, they're good guys. And as I started counting the different communities, winning the endorsements of some of these leaders, some of them were worth $10 million a piece. And it was about a year and a half later, in 2010, as we got through all the different communities, that it was $300 million in additional revenue for Lenovo coming through these new communities. And that was big news. And now Lenovo in 2013 is the biggest PC company in the world. No one would have thought that they could overtake Dell or overtake HP. but winning in the small, medium, large, and then consumer segments has really lifted that company.
Almost seems like a note of vindication for the IBM PC division that spun off to Lenovo and then comes back full circle.
It is, and it was the IBM PC division that looked to build good quality and kind of a robust, but really didn't have the vision for expanding really outside of the large enterprise, even mid-market to large enterprise sweet spot that they had. And it was Lenovo that injected the freedom to participate. And you asked me a direct question about ChannelEyes, and what I learned is that winning these endorsements isn't expensive. You would think that, I have to go and spend all kinds of money advertising in a magazine, or buy up the main part of the trade show and be the platinum sponsor. Every single one of these endorsements came from being a bronze sponsor, getting in at the initial tier of money. In many cases, it was $5,000 to join a community just to get the basic package. And we multiplied that by 30 communities. It was on average 5. Some communities were more, some were much less. But it was about $150,000 in marketing spend. And for a Fortune 500 company, I didn't have to seek approval to do that. Yeah. It was something, out of my own budget I could do and put it on my own credit card in many cases. So it wasn't something that, as you started to hear me think of, talk about 900 things, you think, oh my goodness, that's millions of dollars. I could never do that. And it's not true. It's something we could also do at ChannelEyes. And, we didn't spend $150,000 in marketing, but we could definitely, spend some money out of the gate as a startup to participate and to get this wide, visibility growing. So even if you are a channel partner, if you're a small vendor, you can do these things, and cost isn't the limitation. It's really the labor and the ability to have the resources to be able to do this.
I had planned on asking you what your favorite social media tools are for growing ChannelEyes, but it seems very clear that it's not Twitter, it's not Facebook, it's not LinkedIn, it's endorsements and communities and connectors.
Well, they're two different things. So as you get the connector and you join their community, all of a sudden those same percentages that I talked about, it's likely that 2% of that community, like Twitter, by the way, it's 5 and 6% like Facebook and LinkedIn. So when you participate in that community, in their Twitter stream, in their Facebook page, in their LinkedIn, but some of their users, and a growing number like Pinterest, some people even read Tumblr. There's the Google Plus. One thing I like is SlideShare. Everyone has PowerPoints. It's an ability to kind of share your story via PowerPoints. Having a YouTube channel is key. There are a growing number, and one of the biggest number really like video, and it's a place where you can share video across other platforms like email and newsletters and on your web page and other places. So I don't have a favorite, but back to the Dandelion piece, anyone that would tell you that, oh my goodness, you have to be on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the end all and be all. I would just go back and say that, then you're going to capture 6%, and 6% of people are going to be really, really happy with you. But the other 94 are going to be dragged in, kicking and screaming, and probably won't see you. So it's all strategic, and you want to have probably 10 different social media platforms that you participate in, and cover the basis for and understand. And that's the way to hit the highest social audience that you can.
Final question I wanted to ask you was for the small solution provider, the small MSP, that in many cases it's a big step for them to even have a full-time marketing person at any level, whether they're entry level or more seasoned. Say they've drawn the line in the sand where the owner has finally gotten at least a full-time account manager and at least a full-time marketing person. What would you put at the top of the to-do list for that marketing person to make sure that they really spend a lot of resources on? Is it the connections? Is it the communities?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, working in a startup, starting with 4 people, you find out that everyone's a marketing person, everyone's a salesperson, everyone's operations, finance, HR. You share these roles, but it's something that you don't have to work full time on. When I mentioned one theme per month, if you're a very small partner, like a 1 or 2 person shop, you can maybe do one theme per quarter, which will give you the ability to to spread it out a little bit, which means you only have to write one blog every quarter, and then every week, you can share that blog across the different platforms and keep pointing back to it to reach that 7. But everything I just said about connectors refocus itself locally. So think of the town you're in, and I've had the ability to move 8 times. So I've learned this quickly. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and now I'm in Albany, in upstate New York. You find when I look at the local business community here, and if I was a small business partner, I would learn about the different communities inside my city or town that I'm in. So the Chamber of Commerce is a natural one. There's business meetup communities. There's probably industry-based communities around town. But the same thing exists. To meet the people and to get the word of mouth and the referral type of piece going, you have to seek out those super connectors in your town. And depending on the size, if it's a small place, the mayor will be one of them. The chief of police is usually another. Obviously, the head of Chamber of Commerce is another. Go to your local college or university, and some of their people will be another. It's pretty quick that you will build this list of the different networks and referral networks that you can build locally. And the same concept as I went through, that each of them have a way of communicating to their tribe, and if you can participate, and if you're lucky to get some level of endorsement, you can then communicate through this person to their following, and you start to build up whether it's industry or specialty or other types of networks. You may have to off hours that night or something, like show up at Chamber of Commerce events or the local newspaper type of events and other types of things. But you'll build some credibility and you'll build some visibility local that the word of mouth piece will really drive your business. And you don't have to be a marketing person. You just have to be aware of how these networks build and how this trust builds. And you can become a pretty big business locally by having that kind of web of connections built. And that's where I would focus my time.
That's excellent advice. I've been speaking with Jay McBain. He's the co-founder and chief social officer at ChannelEyes. Jay, what's the best way for listeners to keep up with what you're up to and what ChannelEyes is up to?
Sure, and I'd be remiss if I spoke for the last half an hour and not mentioning that we're across all the different platforms. Just look for ChannelEyes. You can Google it or any of your platforms. It's ChannelEyes, EYES, all one word. You can get me across any of those networks as well, and our website is channeleyes.com.
Very good. Excellent advice for channel program managers, for marketing directors within channel programs, for small and mid-sized solution providers, kind of a little bit of something for everyone on how to grow their visibility, grow the credibility, engage better with connectors, engage better with communities. Thanks so much, Jay, for joining me today.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the IT Channel Inbound Marketing Podcast. If you learned something valuable from today's episode, please search for the IT Channel Inbound Marketing Podcast in the iTunes podcast directory and give us a 5-star rating. To get access to past episodes and be notified about upcoming episodes, be sure to visit www.sphomerun.com/podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you back again next time. Take care now.